Hello, my name's Matt, and this is ConspiroTV, the sister site to the blog conspiromedia.wordpress.com. Go take a look. Go on. Now, to coincide with last month's release of the Beatles' 1968 animated movie Yellow Submarine on DVD and Blu-ray, ConspiroMedia grabbed the opportunity to chat with artist, author, researcher and radio host Robert Richard Hieronimus Ph.D. His 2002 book, Inside the Yellow Submarine, The Making of the Beatles Animated Classic, has been dubbed an indispensable companion to the movie. It not only features exclusive interviews with all the principal creators of the film and an intricate account of the details behind the making of it, but also a unique analysis of the esoteric symbolic aspects within the movie itself. In fact, the occult archetypes that Hieronimus believes are bubbling beneath the Yellow Submarine's waters are what initially sparked his interest in the movie. Now, given his lifelong devotion and interest in symbols and ancient knowledge, it should hardly come as a surprise either. In 1969, he founded the AUM, America's first state-approved school of esoteric studies, which granted certificates in the occult sciences, mystic arts and religious metaphysics. In 1981, he received his PhD for the doctoral thesis, are you ready for this? An historic analysis of the reverse of the American Great Seal and its relationship to the ideology of humanistic psychology. Okay, now furthermore, his research on the Great Seal of the United States has been used in the speeches, literature and libraries of the White House, the US State Department and the Department of Interior. A member of a number of secret societies, his expert knowledge and understanding of symbols and the occult has led to regular TV appearances in a number of documentaries and news shows on the BBC, the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, the Sci-Fi Channel and Fox News, to name a few. He's also an artist, having established a long career as a muralist and painter. His occult and symbolic murals include a 2,700 square foot work known as Apocalypse, which was completed during 1968 to 1969 at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. Another of his works, The Historic Views of Baltimore, 1752 to 1857, is now housed in Maryland's War Memorial Building. The film, The Yellow Submarine, just for those of you who are not too aware of it, tells the story of the Beatles' efforts to rescue an underwater world known as Pepperland from the music-hating Blue Meanies who've invaded it and transformed it from a colourful, beautiful paradise of happiness into a grey, barren, depressing wasteland. A sailor by the name of Old Fred manages to escape in a yellow submarine which is perched on top of a Mayan Aztec-like pyramid after he's called on by the mayor of Pepperland to get help. He travels to Liverpool, where he successfully persuades John, Paul, George and Ringo to join him. They board the submarine and embark on a surreal journey which takes them through the Sea of Time, the Sea of Science, the Sea of Monsters, the Sea of Nothing, the foothills of the headlands, the Sea of Holes and the Sea of Green, before finally arriving in Pepperland. They eventually win over the Blue Meanies with a combination of music, positivity and love. In an article on his website, 21stcenturyradio.com, Hieronimus explores some of the symbols in the film and any possible hidden meanings. Now, Hieronimus isn't wholly convinced that the Beatles played an active role in implanting occult symbols or hidden meanings into the film. He also doesn't believe that the team behind the making of the film were consciously attempting to communicate an esoteric message via the use of occult symbology. However, Hieronimus was totally blown away by some of the symbols in the film when he first watched it back in 1968-1969. Of course, it's no secret that the Beatles were interested in esoteric subject matter. The song Tomorrow Never Knows from their Revolver album was inspired by the Timothy Leary book, The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And George Harrison wrote The Inner Light after reading passages from the Chinese classic text Tao Te Ching. It's widely known that Lennon was a voracious reader with an interest in a wide variety of subjects, including ancient history, religion and the occult, and during the 1970s he also explored numerology with his wife Yoko Ono and visited the pyramids of Egypt. It's widely assumed that the Beatles were first introduced to these concepts by the well-to-do intellectuals they befriended during the mid-1960s, such as author and former art gallery owner Barry Miles. However, However, there's strong evidence to suggest that their fascination with ancient mysteries and the occult goes back much, much further. Back to their days in Liverpool, when they were still struggling, penniless young musicians barely out of school, and when the word Beatles was yet to be uttered. Now, how or where did these working class provincial lads acquire such knowledge at such a young age? And how does this connect, if at all, to the occult symbolism in the Yellow Submarine movie? The details surrounding this intriguing and overlooked episode in the Beatles story is discussed in the Conspiro Media interview with Robert Hieronimus, as well as some of the occult symbols hiding in plain sight within the film. He also talks about his long and often rocky dealings with the Beatles company Apple, and the friendly and fruitful relationships he's forged over the years with some of the Beatles' trusted inner circle, including the band's longtime PR man Derek Taylor and famed record producer Sir George Martin. He relives the night when he successfully assembled together most of the original crew members of the movie for a 30th anniversary reunion TV special at the BBC's legendary Maida Vale studios, and he also talks about the genius of Yellow Submarine art designer Heinz Edelman, who died in 2009. However, I began the conversation by asking Robert about Janis Joplin, The Doors and Jimi Hendrix, because it was brought to my attention that he'd worked and spent time with these legendary music stars. Is that true?
Well, spending time with them and working with them is a little bit different. When we got together, especially, say, for instance, with Jimi Hendrix, we weren't talking about music, so we weren't working on what we were always talking about were symbols in history. He was a had great interest in America's history and its symbols, and that's what we focused on. So, and then, as a matter of fact, this is one of the problems with most of the musicians back there in the mid-'60s and late '60s, is that there was always a separation between the guys that basically were called the suits, the people that controlled them in the business, and the actual musicians themselves. And what they always tried to do was to have the various rock and roll groups, or if it weren't rock and roll, or some other group, entertained. And you might say I was kind of like a person that was entertaining them with the kind of information that they were very much interested in, which was UFOs, the paranormal, life beyond death, anything dealing with Atlantis, reincarnation, etc., etc., which, of course, most of the guys wearing suits had no idea what the heck that was about, didn't believe in it for certain, but I seldom met anyone in rock and roll that was not interested in any of those subjects. It was rare if they weren't.
And what brought you to meet these people? I understand you were in the music industry?
Well, again, it's not that I was in the industry, but what happened was this. I was up in Philadelphia, and I've always had an art car, a painted car, which always attracted a lot of attention. So in this one particular nightclub was a group called, at that particular time, goodness gracious, for some reason his name just slipped my mind after all these 50 years. John Fred and his Playboy Band. Now, John Fred and his Playboy Band was one of those one-hit wonders, but it was a big hit. I think it sold almost close to 6 million records, and it was called Judy in Disguise with Diamonds, or Judy in Disguise with Glasses. It was kind of a takeoff on John Lennon's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And it was kind of bubble-gummy. And so that particular group did not want to be represented as being bubblegum artists, and were very much afraid of being one-hit wonders, which they were at that time. So they saw my art car, they saw my posters up there in Philadelphia for a show that I was having, and they said, this is the guy to do our next album cover. That's how they approached me. And I said, well, what would you like on your album cover? And they said, well, look, the kind of stuff that you do on your posters, symbols. And they specifically said, we do not want our faces on this album cover. We want to put our emphasis on what we know and think and believe, not what we look like and that kind of thing. Well, that was a great idea. I thought that was terrific, but I didn't think that their the people that controlled them were going to like that. They don't like that kind of stuff when you're trying to sell someone's records. The suits are in there for making the big bucks, and the artists are out there to try to do what they think is their purpose. Well, so they said, look, Bob, in order for you to do our record album cover, you got to go up and see our people, our representatives up in New York. And I said, okay, I'll go do that. I went up to see them, and this was Elektra Records. And they said to me, well, look, Bob, we know your background, we like your art, but you should not be doing record album covers for John Fred and his Playboy band because they're not going to be in business much longer. You need to meet the guys that really are on your level, and that is dealing with symbols and consciousness. And they knew that Jimi Hendrix was. They knew that the Doors were. They knew that other individuals whom they did not control at that time, which was Bob Marley and everything like that. And my links with Marley came a lot later. So they said, look, how would you like to do record album covers for Elektra? But first you've got to meet these guys, and you gotta we'll see how you interact with them. And if it goes well, then you can do the record album covers. Well, I said, okay, great. And now who do I see first? And they said, well, this was July the 2nd, I believe it was, 1968. And they said, on July 3rd, tomorrow night, Jimi Hendrix is with a group in a New York club, and what we would like you to do. But I said, Jimi Hendrix wasn't on your album cover. I mean, he didn't do work for Elektra. He said, doesn't matter. Mainly what I didn't know was all of these different companies, record companies, some of them were owned by the same people, but most importantly, they had a lot of friendships involved there, which meant that you spread yourself around. That's what I'm trying to say with these particular groups. So that very night, July the 3rd, they said, go to the club. He will be jamming. I think Jeff Beck was there and others were there. I mean, this was a nightclub in which most New Yorkers did not go because it was a select nightclub that the rock and rollers could goof off in and have their privacy and that kind of thing. So I went, and I always traveled with my art notes, a book called The Dictionary of Symbols, because I was into symbols and consciousness at that time, still am, of course. And they said, just sit down there, find yourself, and here's a card. You take this card, and whoever you show it to, your free drinks are going to be free, and you're not going to have to pay anything to go to these things. And Jimmy will know you. He'll we've told him generally what you look like. So, and since besides that, I look like most of them. That's what they liked. They liked the fact that my beard was down to my waist, my hair was below that. And anyone that looked like that back there in the late 60s didn't have too many friends in this country, you have to understand, but except for the guys that were rocking and rolling and other kind of stuff. So I'm sitting there at this very little table with my journal and my notes, which I always took because I would draw ideas as I would sit there and listen to groups. Jimmy came over and said, well, what are you doing there? And I showed him what I was doing. I was making notes. And he said, eventually, what's that book? What's that book you're holding there? What do you keep looking at? And I said, that's called a Dictionary of Symbols. And he said, that's far out. He had no idea that there was a dictionary of symbols that if you took, say, for instance, if you wrote a song and you said the flowers and the birds and the trees and the grass, all of those are symbols. They all have stories. So you have stories within stories. Well, he liked that idea a great deal. I mean, as a matter of fact, most of the guys that I ever talked to backstage, and some of them, in my opinion, were much greater than people like the Doors or whatever, but that's another story. So Jimmy and I started talking about symbols. And the first thing that we talked about, besides UFOs, because he was very heavily into UFOs. As a matter of fact, he later on saw some UFOs, but that's something else. And he said to me, what you do with this book of symbols is that you collect these symbols, and you know what their meanings are, and you fit them in with the various album covers or whatever, posters or murals that you're designing. I said, that's generally what it is. But he said, well, what about that symbol of the pyramid and the eye and the triangle that's found on the back of the $1 bill? And I said, well, that's really interesting, Jimmy, mainly because, you know, in rock and roll, there were rock and roll posters, which I own, which go back to 1966 and maybe even 65, that had at its centerpiece this eye and a triangle on the pyramid. Now, of course, this symbolism is on the back of the $1 bill. It's a very mystical symbol, and there are many, many different levels of meaning to these particular symbols and the story it tells. And we were focusing on the founding fathers because it looked like to us that all of these symbols were from secret societies. You know, the eye and the triangle and the pyramid. And I showed him and talked to him about all the little booklets. There are a lot of little booklets that interpreted this symbol, but they weren't scholarly, number one. They were filled with errors, number two, and they were filled with errors mainly because it wasn't until about 1978 that the State Department finally published the most accurate description of the history of the Great Seal and the meaning of those particular symbols. And I had struggled with the State Department for, 15 or so years to try to get that information. So Jimmy and I were focused on, this is a side of America we know nothing about. And it's not about war. It's about something that has to do with the Great Pyramid. What is the Great Pyramid? Now, you know, there's a lot of research done today which indicates that if it was a tomb, it was also used for many other things. There were various secret rituals from various esoteric orders that were part of the Great Seal. That is part of the pyramid inside that the king's chamber. The Rosicrucians used it for that particular. Other areas, even Freemasons have gone into it and used it as a ritual room. So it wasn't just for burying the dead. It had other important meanings. So both of us knowing and believing that the pyramid was a temple and not just a burial ground. A temple to what? What was that all about? And what was that eye in the triangle? You know, other people were trying to say, hey, that's Big Brother. Well, that's not Big Brother. You can interpret it on that way if you want. But the meaning of a symbol, especially when it's created by historians and others, they have researched the meaning of every particular symbol, and that they said basically, you know what this eye in a triangle is about? It is about the sun. It is about the masculine energy field, masculine energy in regards to balance within nature. And the eye in the pyramid was more or less like the temple, which means it's like the mother symbolism. It is like the breast of Egypt. That's what pyramids basically symbolized. So you have there a balance of male and femaleness. And that's about as far as we could go with that because there wasn't much research done in that area, and that's why it took me from 1966 to, let's see, my first book came out in 1974, then 76, then 1989, and then 2005, and then 2008. It took all of that time to get to the bottom of what that symbolism was. But that's not so important right now. What is important is your question in dealing with, what did I do with these guys? What we would do backstage is we would talk about symbols, consciousness. We would sometimes attempt a short meditation, something to put them in another mode, because by and large, these kinds of symbols talk about going into another world, a personal world, which is also a spiritual world. And most musicians need that kind of calming if they're going to do quality stuff up there on the stage. Now, if they're going to do stuff that's going to make a lot of noise, that's something else altogether. So that's how it began. It began with Jimi Hendrix, and then I worked with a lot of smaller groups, and every now and then I had the great joy of being backstage with other groups, especially the Doors, and introducing groups that I thought were better than the Doors. There were certain groups in the United States at that time called actually the United States of America. It was a band of I've forgotten how many there were. Maybe there were 5. They could play every instrument available. In other words, they were multi-talented. They knew something like 40 or 50 instruments out of 5 or 6 people. They were so more educated in music and presentations and that kind of thing than most other people were. But that doesn't mean you sell. That does not mean you make the big bucks. You know, you've got to water down a lot of that those ideas and meanings because its audience had no idea most of this was going on. I mean, when I first listened into rock and roll and I started hearing words and symbols, and I thought to myself, do these guys know what they're talking about? I mean, does Bob Marley really know what he's talking about when he says these things? Or not just Hendrix, but any of the other, or the Beatles especially, have any ideas as to what the meanings of their work is about? And that became really important to me because around the same time that I was doing this kind of work, the Yellow Submarine came about, the film came about. And in 1968, when I first, read the booklet, there was also a comic, but it wasn't until '69, basically, that movie made its big splash. Yes, it was shown in November of 1968 in the United States, but it wasn't until later that it really came to its prominence. And when I started to see all of the symbols in the film The Yellow Submarine, I thought to myself, these Beatles are brilliant. They are multi-leveled, they're multi-consciousness, and it seems to me whoever it was of them that thought up this movie was multiple genius. And of course I thought it was Paul McCartney and John Lennon, and maybe George Harrison. But of course the truth was they had nothing to do with it. All they did was create 4 songs because they were required to put in the film. They were never really interested in this film until they got to see some of the final work, and then they fell in love with it. And then they wanted to be involved, but it was just too late to put their real stamp on it from that standpoint, and that caused a great deal of difficulty. But that's now not how I saw the Yellow Submarine in 1968 or 69. I looked at it and could see all of these symbols. There again, there's a pyramid there. What was that pyramid doing there? Why was the yellow... Pardon me?
Indeed. That's one of the questions I was going to ask you, actually. What is that submarine doing on the tip of that pyramid in Pepperland?
Well, that question should have been asked 100 times. And thank you for asking it, because most people didn't pay attention to what was going on. I thought to myself that the guys, I had to find out who did this film. If the Beatles didn't do it, where did the inspiration come? And I was kind of upset about that, because I had spent so much time on symbols and consciousness, and I had such admiration for the Beatles, I thought to myself, they had to have created this film. They had to have known what that idea of all you need is love is really a key philosophy in the world today. So I thought to myself, well, if they don't know, who did? So trying to locate the guys that created the film is what the long 30-year journey was all about. Now back to that pyramid with the Yellow Submarine on it. Take a look at the symbol of just the submarine in yellow. The color yellow, because that's what you do in symbolism. The color yellow is all expansive. It's a symbol for the sun. It's an outflowing, masculine, male type of energy. And it is literally about the sun and all of the positive spiritual energy radiating from the sun. However, that's just yellow. What about submarine? What is a submarine? A submarine, of course, is what is underwater. What is water all about? Well, water is where human beings, where all life came from water. That's important. But to be under it, what did that mean? Well, if you get into esoteric symbolism, water is a symbol for what's called the astral world, the astral plane, the star world. So when you connect yellow and submarine together, you have a balance there of the the solar spiritual energy and the feminine, because that's what water is about. It's the mother symbolism. So itself, the Yellow Submarine itself tells a story of a balance between the masculine solar energy and the feminine energy that deals with protection, nurturing, caring for, mom. It's mother. It's a mom-dad symbolism that you have there. Now, certainly the Beatles did not know what that meant. I don't think that they translated it that way. But I thought the guys that did the film knew what that meant, because to me, they were brilliant. I was reading into every symbol that they had, an entire story, but it didn't mean that was the story they were telling, or that they were conscious of it. And that's why it took 30 years to get to the truth, because I had to talk with over 40 of them that created the film. Now remember, even though I tried to get in touch with the Beatles hundreds of times, in all kinds of ways, they weren't interested. Maybe they weren't interested because it was just the Yellow Submarine film, and they knew damn well that they didn't have anything to do with it, and they would be asked questions about it. Well, why didn't you want to get involved with the film? Why did you slow it down? Why did it have such a paltry budget? It had a budget of $1 million, but $200,000 of it was taken off the top by Brian Epstein. Can you make an hour and a half film like the Yellow Submarine for $1,800,000? No, you can't. So who paid for this? Well, the guys that created the film. That caused a big problem between the guys that created the film and the guys who were their bosses, because obviously they were underpaid, they were overworked, they were given an impossible deadline. But you know why they stuck to it? Because they loved the Beatles. That's why. That's why. Every one of them, except for, well, there are one or two that didn't particularly care if the Beatles lived or died. But from their standpoint, that was really super important. It was for the Beatles. And because it was for the Beatles, they would sacrifice their lives, literally. Many of them became very ill during this process. The guy that really created the film, Heinz Edelman, this was a genius's genius, a world genius, who's looked at in all designs, especially through Europe, and now he's being rediscovered in America as the tops, the man. And he was the guy that had all the ideas for the Yellow Submarine, not the Beatles, who some of them, like John Lennon, claimed that he had some of these ideas, but that can be disproven. But the most important thing was that idea of the Yellow Submarine, telling a story about what? This Yellow Submarine sitting on the pyramid, what is that about? The pyramid, again, is a mother symbol. It is the breast. It is the mountain. When you go into symbolism, look up mountain. And you will find that it has been many, many times the symbol for the mother's breast, nurturing, etc. Now, we all understand that pyramids don't look like breasts, but they're mounds.
Sincerely hope not.
That's right. That's right. Well, who knows? In the future, the way they're making breasts today, they might just come out with that. That would be kind of funny. Then they could put a little pyramid at the end of it. Well, anyway, I'm sorry. This is a very complicated subject. It's much more complicated. And if I had known in 1968 that this journey would take over 40-some years and cost a fortune. I mean, you cannot interview 40 of the people around the planet and not ring up enormously really great costs. You can't put on various events that we did at the London BBC. In 1998, Just that production alone at the BBC cost us $50,000 to bring all together the guys that created the film. Not the Beatles, because the Beatles promised, two of them promised to come, but they never did. But we didn't expect them to. I mean, you know, as a matter of fact, knowing that they realized that they didn't really do the film, I'm pretty sure that they were going to skirt the issue no matter what. It's an embarrassing situation because the guys that created the film made the Beatles famous many times over, especially now, because it's that film when 2 and 3 and 5-year-old, even younger than that, watch it, they are introduced to the Beatles in such a way that it's a part of their life. The song Yellow Submarine is so catchy. You know, Sir Paul McCartney describes very carefully how that song came to him. It came to him in dreams. It was a story that unraveled. I mean, McCartney is very intuitive. Yes, he's brilliant. We all know that. Yes, he's a billionaire. He deserves it. But he is brilliant because he is multi-leveled. Same thing with Lennon. Same thing with Harrison. Ringo's a different commodity altogether, and yet he is so symbolic of an individual that sees clearly his value and his worth, which is, as he said before and many times, it's linked to there's love and peace. And that can sound pretty corny, but it's not. I mean, those who have been involved in secret societies know that there are two key elements to attain higher consciousness, and it's love and peace. He's aware of those kind of things. Now, when you take a look at this symbol of the submarine on top of the pyramid, what does that mean? Well, to me, it's the same kind of symbolism, because the eye in the triangle tells the same story that the submarine does. And the pyramid on the Great Seal of the United States tells the same story that you see that pyramid on the in the Yellow Submarine. But you must remember, that's a Mayan pyramid. That's not an Egyptian pyramid, because you can't walk up steps and down the steps in Egyptian pyramids. But all pyramids carry the same kind of meaning and symbolism from that standpoint. So what you have there, just that one eye in a triangle over the pyramid, tells the same story of the submarine on top of the pyramid. What it says is balance. Balance. There's such a thing as male energy, female energy, but they must be balanced. The problems that we have on our planet today are pretty obvious. The female has been diminished to pointy shoes and big breasts and stuff like that. They don't care about the mind. The mind is not that important, but it's that balance that women have of nurturing and caring for that we miss, because take a look at our planet today. However, look what Sir Paul McCartney has done for Mother Nature. This is extraordinary. He and Sir George Martin, now it's funny, I can talk to Sir George Martin and spend time with him about all of these things, but to talk to Sir Paul McCartney, I can talk to the President of the United States before I can get an email to Paul McCartney. And yet I have such high regard for him, because it was that battle that Sir Paul McCartney and Sir George Martin fought against Monsanto made a huge difference in Europe in preventing Monsanto from literally controlling the seeds of our world, of our food. We have that big problem here in the country. They won't even allow people now at this time to know if they're using Monsanto products and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, you had those Sir George and Sir Paul McCartney, in my opinion, are going to go down in history when we look back over this terrible, terrible period of ignoring nature altogether. Sir Paul, Linda McCartney was an extraordinary soul. I'm so disappointed that I didn't get to interview her. We had it all set up. and especially to talk about the food that she was creating, etc. And she passed on before that, and it was very unfortunate because she knew where we were coming from, and we knew where she was coming from, and so it was bound to be a pretty exciting interview. But unfortunately, it never happened. But her work and Sir Paul's work dealing with avoiding genetically modified food is one of the great blessings of what the Beatles. Well, actually, I'll still call Sir Paul McCartney a Beatle. I think he doesn't mind. Ringo minds, but I mean, Sir Paul doesn't seem to mind anymore. That's an extraordinary thing to do for the planet and not even be recognized for it. That's what's most amazing to me. Most people are not aware of what that accomplishment did in saving the lives of tens of millions of people who eventually, eating genetically modified food, they're going to get cancer. They're going to get cancer of the stomach. They're going to get cancer. It takes years for that to develop. And because all the testing was never done on Monsanto, it's a heavy price. That's the reason why it was so important. And I know because I talked to Sir George directly about it, why they battled it. And I think they changed it about up to 86 or 87% of those folks from the United Kingdom supported that issue. So the reason why I got involved in doing this Yellow Submarine film, as I mentioned earlier, was I wanted to know if this group, the Beatles, were as brilliant as I thought they were. And I find out it was 40-some other people that had the brilliance. And I guess you might say the Beatles had the intelligence to leave them alone.
Well, here's a thought, because I was watching a documentary with Pete Best, who used to be drummer with the Beatles before they became famous, and then they replaced him with Ringo when they signed to EMI. Mm-hmm. He was talking to a documentary team about his days with the Beatles before they were famous. He was talking about a club his mother used to own. It was called the Casbah Coffee Club in Liverpool.
Yeah.
And the Beatles used to play there. He talks about when they decorated the club. They painted it and put some murals and stuff on the walls. In Pete Best's own words, he says there was an Aztec room which had Egyptian graffiti and mystical Eastern signs. Now he says that John, Paul and George painted these murals. There was also spiders and rainbows and, interestingly, a beetle, the insect, the beetle. Now this is before they came up with the name The Beatles. And then when I link it to what you were talking about in one of your stunning articles on your website about the esoteric meanings behind what could possibly be behind the Yellow Submarine, you talk about the beetle and the Egyptian beetle. When you put this all together, it's rather interesting, isn't it?
Oh, it's Matt, it is otherworldly. Yes, it's more than it's like discovering platinum or something. Now, you just added a very important piece of information to the history of not just the Beatles, but the ideas behind it. Those Aztec murals, which I was not aware of, and other symbols that they would have painted on it, that's really important. It indicates this. It indicates, because whenever I brought this up to other people, and they said, well, that was just the guys that created the film that had them in it. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, that's true. That's where it came from. However, why did they unconsciously use those symbols? Could they have been in that little nightclub? They'd call it the Casbah. What did you call it again?
The Casbah.
You know, that's a very important reference. And thank you for bringing it up, because it's not been brought up before. But let's go back to that beetle. Oh, man. You know, the beetle is actually, in ancient Egypt, a very, very sacred symbol. It means, by and large, rebirth, regeneration. And the reason why it has that symbolism is because the beetle, when it lays its eggs, what it does is a particular kind of beetle, it rolls the leg into dung balls. And these dung balls, which you'll find, when I was in Egypt returned there many times, these beetles are really large. And the dung balls they leave behind like little marbles. Eventually what happens was, the reason why they used this beetle symbolism was because people would take a look at these dung balls over a period of time, and bingo, out comes a beetle, as if it was born by itself. It created itself in this dung ball like magic, but it wasn't. It was because the beetle laid its egg, it rolled it into this dung ball with its legs in such a way that mimicked the world globe being rotated as we rotate on our axis here. And all this meant to the Egyptians, because within the secret societies of the ancient Egyptians, which you hear very little about, they believed the world was round. They believed that it rotated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was the most important part about the priesthood of all of these secret societies. They did not give that information out to regular folks. You had to be part of that priesthood. You had to be involved in order to learn that. You went to school and learned that from them. So you're pointing at beetle symbolism out was rebirth, regeneration, and that is exactly, on a certain level, what the Beatles did to our planet. At a time, in the United States especially, when our president was murdered, and probably murdered, not the way we were told, there probably was government involved somewhere. And the organized crime was probably involved with somewhere. And there are lots of theories that most Americans are not aware of, that one theory especially, that JFK had learned that there was a conspiracy to control, within our country, a conspiracy by corporate structures, and what would be called by President Eisenhower the military-industrial complex. President Eisenhower, as he left office in 61, warned. He said, "Look out for the military-industrial complex. It's all about money. It's all about war. It's all about their attempt to control the planet." Whoa, boy, this stuff gets kind of heavy, and that's one of the reasons why they say JFK had to come down, because he was going to expose that. As soon as President Eisenhower mentioned this, he became persona non grata with the media and just about everybody else. He was no longer held that great respect. They had to move into another mode of criticizing him to make it look like he didn't know what he was talking about. But that's what we have today in our country. But worse, the military-industrial complex is now owned in part and involved with the media. How in the world are you going to get sensitive information about Mother Nature and caring for our planet out of an organism which is bent on making as much money as it possibly can? I don't expect you to believe this. All I know is that over the 68 years that I've been on this planet, I used to laugh at all this stuff. I used to think, you got to be kidding. This is crazy stuff. Why would they kill the president for that? Well, for lots of reasons. When you have multi-millionaires and then billionaires getting themselves involved, they have to control the military, they have to control the media and the government. When they got that, they got you.
And I'm sure John Lennon knew this too. When you listen to some of his interviews, especially rather ominously towards the end of his life, he was getting more candid about this stuff. And of course, a lot of their music was taken up by the peace movement. I didn't know, for example, that Yellow Submarine was used as an anthem by the American peace movement and environmental groups. Right. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
It is, really.
I know. And the thing is that's what I just wish most Americans were as educated as you are in these particular areas, because right now, with the re-release of the Yellow Submarine film, you're having, my gosh, I hate to put it this way, but I think you'll understand. You're actually having almost new converts at the age of 2 and 3 and 4 years old, which just like they'll sing that song forever. Ringo is right. Ringo said, even babies in the womb, even infants know that song, and because where it came from through Sir Paul McCartney's dreams was a very precious area of trying to understand what balance is all about. Because I think of all the Beatles, he's more balanced in a certain sense. But Lennon was a great hero in lots of different ways, and his murder was not exactly as how we were told, in my opinion, and the person who murdered him was part of something else altogether, but no one will believe that really in this country. There was a war going on under President Nixon, Richard Milhouse Nixon, what he was called the I am not a crook president. Actually, he was a crook, against rock and roll. And there were many musicians in rock and roll that died an early death, not the way we're told. And mainly because they knew that, Nixon especially, knew that there was a great deal of power in whatever Lennon was saying, or others, Morrison of the Doors, or Bob Marley. Whoa, he really knocked the CIA off their gourd there for a while. But they got even. I mean, you don't deal with those kind of organizations in that way and expect to live. You're right. Lennon, I think he knew. I knew, just like many other people. Marley knew in his battle to exist, in his war, literally, with the CIA, that eventually he was going to go down. And unfortunately, Matt, it takes that kind of sacrifice many times before people wake up and say, hey, you mean really Jimi Hendrix didn't die the way we were told? I don't think he did. Marley did not die the way we were told. When the Beatles came to this country, we had something to forget. We were able to forget that, as many of us who were at that age thought, I think we got, it's just going to sound funny in a certain way, Matt. Hey, I think we got some crooks in government. I think, which we weren't supposed to think, obviously. We were just supposed to accept the line that we had got the guy. But when you follow that clearly through that, the same way when you follow through and you look at who killed John Lennon and the connections between that person and the administration at that particular time, Republicans especially, there's something that certainly was going on between that person and the Ford administration at that time. Not that Ford, President Ford, was obviously involved in that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that in that administration, as you know, at least I assume you know that our government is not run by our president. He's only part of it. The House of Representatives and Senate and then the Supreme Court make up the other groups that can change things radically. So just because you can control one part of that triumvirate doesn't mean you're going to be able to succeed. So the Beatles, I think, are almost, in a certain sense, as we used to say, they're archetypal. They are, when you go to the symbol of the Beatles, and you go to the Yellow Submarine, and you connect them all together, rebirth and regeneration. How is one reborn and regenerated? Well, through balance, through the balance of the feminine spiritual aspect of it and the physical material world. It's balancing the material and the spiritual world. And we do that by living, because in each individual, I don't want to offend you or your listeners, but within every human, there is a soul. And in that soul, you have a piece of a connection, a line to the deity. And if, through meditation, through prayer, through service to others, I know how corny this sounds. I know that. I've said this a billion times and say, what the hell is that? Well, through meditation, you learn to control your emotions. Through prayer, you learn to speak to the Supreme Being or the deity. Through service to others, you help others. Service is key to everything we do on this planet. The golden rule is the most important thing. How you treat others is the most important thing. Now, yes, it's important to do many other things, but it's how you treat others that you, in the future, you're going to be treated by. So that kind of element and understanding that the Beatles, whether they were conscious of it or not, became symbols of a level of consciousness that if you studied meditation for 3,000 years, you would learn. I mean, this is what happened with George Harrison and why he pushed it so hard. I mean, this is an extraordinary soul of all the Beatles. I made no secret that the guy that I've been most impressed with is George Harrison, and how he was able to attempt to fund things like Bangladesh when everybody was against him, and the hell that he had to go through to do that.
That's right, the Bangladesh concert. The forerunner to Live Aid, if you like. Surely.
It's the forerunner to everything. Other people said, you can't do it, George. You can't do it. As soon as that money gets over there, the government will take it. And so how are you going to get it done? Well, Sir George, excuse me. I'd like to make him Sir George, but he's not.
I'm sure many people would.
Yeah, he should have been made anyway. But George Harrison, having entered that other world, spiritual world, that spiritual dimension many, many times, when someone tried to assassinate him, just look at what he and his wife were able to do together to keep him alive, and his reaction to after that. This is a superb soul, really. Yeah, I know this sounds corny and all that other stuff, but I don't give a damn. When you get to be 68 years old, Matt, you get to the point where you just want to say what you really believe. And George Harrison made a very big change in this particular planet. I'm so sorry. Obviously, he passed on. I would have loved to have been able to talk to him just once, almost did, but, as usual, things like that fold up when you don't follow through or you don't work as hard to do them.
You know something, I get this feeling that they do, or they did, want to talk to you at some point, because you nearly got to speak to Linda, i.e. former wife of Paul, Sir Paul. You managed to get friendly with Sir George Martin as well, and Derek Taylor, who was the Beatles' trusted PR man for many years, and worked for them after they split for many years also. So you're getting close. Maybe Paul is using these guys as an unofficial buffer. Who knows?
Well, that would be nice to think, and I'd like to believe that. But the most important thing is not that I really got to get in touch with them. The most important thing is from the work that we've created in this particular book, making sure that people knew how this most important film was done, and it was done out of love. It really was. I mean, you'd be embarrassed to hear what some of these guys were paid. You would not believe the number of hours. We're not talking 10, 12 hours a day for some of them. You're talking, some of these guys are putting close into 18. And they knew that if they didn't work that hard, it wouldn't get done, and that to them would have been very difficult to handle because it was done for a group of 4 individuals whom they felt changed the lives and the world forever. Now, that's not how Heinz Edelman felt about it. He was not a Beatles fan. He was a jazz fan. He was, he and I became very close for about 20 years. He wouldn't even talk about this topic with anyone else because he felt that all they wanted to do was talk about the things that he felt were just about flower power. He was not a flower power person. And a lot of people think, I like the idea of flower power and that kind of thing, but you do know that there's a lot of very insincere people that were involved there, and many of them were very mentally limited and emotionally limited. They had a lot of growing up to do from the perspective of why are we here on this planet and what do we do about it, because that is the most important thing. And again, in the film, you have this four guys finding out and taking the responsibility for changing the world, because remember, there was no color, there was no movement. The Blue Meanies had won. It was the battle was over. And the way the artists decide how to sneak them in to and defeat the Blue Meanies was extraordinary, because nobody was killed. Nobody, in regards to the Blue Meanies, was wiped out. That is an important lesson right there. How did they overcome them? Well, it's very simple. They overcame them with love and peace. Of course, music was the real key, because music to them was their enemy, their mortal enemy. And then it ends up being the bluebird of happiness, as you know, at the very end, when finally the Chief Blue Meanie realizes that he's part of something else that's much larger. Now, that story, I know to younger children, means a lot. 2- and 3-year-olds don't necessarily like to see very violent things. It scares them, obvious. But this particular film was able to create peace, literally, by not doing, by living by the golden rule, which is do unto others. And they took, and I think that is something, a basic lesson that we obviously need to live today. And I wish that other groups that are into this kind of music would be sensitive to it, kind of thing. So when you look at it from this perspective, rock and roll is not what just most people think it is. It has become, back in the 50s, they were always wanting it to die. Moms and dads all wanted it to die. And as a matter of fact, of course, the playing the records backwards. Well, you can play the records backwards if you want, and they make sounds. But did they do that consciously?
Yeah.
I think McCartney, a little later on, but after all this, all the noise about playing backwards, I think the Beatles did do a song on backwards, just to play, and it sounded interesting. It really did. I know Sir George Martin talked about that a couple of times, and there's the real hero as far as I'm concerned. This guy named Sir George Martin.
Of course, because we mentioned him earlier. Well, we've mentioned him quite a few times now. Just for the sake of context, he's actually contributed to your Yellow Submarine book, hasn't he?
Yes, he wrote the introduction to the book, but it didn't stop there. He demanded.
Okay.
He demanded that I see Love, the performance out there in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of Las Vegas. I don't like to. It's not. I just don't like to gamble. I mean, to me, it's hard enough making the money. I don't want to, so I wouldn't want to throw it away.
Okay. Well, you've spoken to you sound like you're really good mates with Sir George Martin and also Derek Taylor, who also contributed to your book too, didn't he? Didn't he write a couple of pieces for you as well, and did some interviews and stuff?
Yes, he was a really good access, and because he knew what I was. He and I had met. He came to the United States for some particular tour locally, and we were on the same show. We were on the same show talking about symbolism, and I didn't know who he was at first. But every time I was talking about symbols or consciousness and everything, he perked up, and I saw this guy opening his eyes, and I thought, who's he? I mean, you can't say collective unconscious to most people and have someone say, hey, that's an interesting point. But he, and so he came over to me afterwards and said, this is what you're saying is really right. And, he mentioned Carl Jung, and he mentioned other researchers that I had suggested were important, Joseph Campbell and that kind of thing. And
Well, that's
so
really
it was,
interesting.
it
That's
was.
very interesting because, again, I think people who don't understand or know the full details of the Beatles story, Derek Taylor was right in there. I mean, he
Oh,
was very, very close to the band, and he was after they split as well. He was a very trusted member of the very close-knit unit they had. Is there anything you ever got from him? Because of course he sadly passed away in recent years. Didn't you get anything from either him or Sir George Martin where you could get some clues what the Beatles really thought about the Yellow Submarine in terms of the esoteric context in which it was set, or which it seems to have been set in? Did you get any
well,
kind of inkling, anything at all?
well, I did from Derek at first, and that
Yeah.
was, he said, Bob, you're heading in the right direction. There's meaning and there's purpose here, and it's all about love and peace. And he said, it's the real thing. He kept saying that to me. It's the real thing. These guys are the real thing, indicating to me that he knew that the Beatles had a much higher meaning and purpose than most other people, that they really were here to change the world. And he wasn't exaggerating. They did, didn't they? Didn't the Beatles change the world? They did.
Yes, they did.
No doubt about it. But if you would have made that statement 30, 40 years ago, that people, what's wrong with you? I mean, they were just a bunch of kids. Well, they were beyond that. They were wise beyond their years. And so, yes, from that standpoint. But from Sir George Martin, Sir George, we've done the only live interview with Sir George in which he talked about, well, UFOs, the paranormal, global warming, of course, Monsanto and food and that kind of thing, and ghosts. Did I say ghosts? Yeah. Anyway, because he's always had ghosts in one or two of those. Even the studio had ghosts. And so it was those things that I realized that Sir George had a side to him that's why I believe he understood Sir Paul and John so well. And especially George Harrison. I think he probably was closer to George Harrison than any of them, because they stayed in harmony, I believe, all of their lives. I think George is, 83 or 84 now?
Yeah,
I'd
probably.
love to go see him again, but we're trying to get him to come to the United States, and that's going to be almost impossible because of the difficulties that would be involved in that, to conduct the Yellow Submarine in a symphony here in Baltimore. And he would love to have done it, but I think it's beyond that point age-wise, because it gets complicated when you get past a certain age. You need to carry with you almost a whole hospital. I mean, and all first class yet. I mean, that makes it really impossible to do the kind of things. But this is these both he and Harrison, in my opinion, were just extraordinary souls and had so much in common. And he also, when I had my frustrations with Neil Aspinall, and I think a lot of people have had frustrations with Neil Aspinall.
Another very close associate of the Beatles. I mean, almost like family. He was there at the beginning when they were in Liverpool, pre-Fame days, wasn't he?
Yeah. But he all of us have had problems. Literally, though, unfortunately, with Neil, not allowing me to do this, not allowing me to do that. And it wasn't until we literally helped. We got a phone call back in 1997. No, sorry, beginning of 98. And it was I had been trying to convince Neil Aspinall to do something on the Yellow Submarine for like 10 years. I mean, it was, or more than that. He's never
And he
returned.
was, sorry to butt in, but he was almost like their unofficial manager, wasn't he?
He
Towards
was.
the end of their career, before they split.
For good reason. They trusted him, and for good reason. I don't know. He never got paid too well in the beginning. None of them did, of course. And later on, I hope he did much better. But it really caused, his work schedule must have been insane. I mean, all the time. And he had to put out so many fires, but Derek Taylor was the guy that really put out the fires. I mean, this was a gentleman. This was someone who knew how to treat people and how to make his point. So from that standpoint, but unfortunately with Neil, he would never talk to me until finally I got a phone call from Apple, and they said, "This is such and such. Bob, we're calling you to see if you will help us in a certain situation." I said, "Well, what was it?" He said, "Well, the Beatles now want to celebrate the Yellow Submarine. They want to do something significant about it. They want to thank the guys that created the film, because that's where the big breach came in. There was little connection at all between the guys that created the film and the Beatles, and it disappointed the guys that created the film. So eventually, what came out of that particular experience was that when we understood where Neil was coming from in pleading his case, he said, he didn't say it, but the guy said, "Look, we want to do this film. We're not getting any cooperation. The guys who did the film don't want to talk to us." And, that doesn't happen much to the Apple or the Beatles. Have you ever noticed that? I mean, it's seldom. If you get a phone call from the Apple or Beatles, you're going to answer it, right? But these guys didn't want to. And they said, why? Why are they ignoring us? Why don't they want to talk to us? And I said, it was because of what you did to them in 1968 and 69. You didn't give them the kind of credit that they deserved. You didn't come in and see their film from the beginning to end. When you did finally see it, then you realized it was good. Then you were going to help, but you helped a little bit too late. You gave us the last song. The last song is Hey Bulldog, and we had to quickly fit it in, and that's when the Beatles wanted to be in it. Have you ever noticed that they're not in the film until the very end? And they are not into the very end because that's finally when they got the Hey Bulldog in there. And of course, if you had 2 or 3 minutes shot of the Beatles, regardless if they were for or against it, you're going to use it. So, and that's what they did. And it was a good ending from that standpoint. But at the same time, in order to accomplish what they needed to do in this particular film, they needed the help of the guys. The guys weren't going to give it, and so I called all of us, we now call ourselves the crew. There's about 45 to 50 of us, and I canvassed them. I said, "Look, I know you had problems with the Beatles before. We all know that. It's in, it's everything I've ever written. We know that. How about opening up one more time?" And they said, "Hieronimus, you're a fool. You're an absolute fool. Do you know what's going to happen if we do that?" I said, "Well, it seems to me that they're open now." And he said, "That'll change. That'll change." And they said, "Well, what have they promised you, Hieronimus?" I said, "Nothing. Nothing yet." And they said, "Don't do it. Don't do it." And so we continued to talk, and I finally convinced some of the more important people, "Okay, we're going to take a chance." But this is what they said to me. They said, "Bob, whatever you were promised by Apple, they will lie to you. They will not tell you the truth, no matter what you do. So don't expect to get any credit for what you're doing. They're not going to credit you in anything." And I said, "Well, that's not the point. That's not what we want. We're crediting you guys." And they said, "Yeah, they're going to credit us first, but you watch what happens later on." So after I convinced 5 or 6 of them, the others said, "Okay, all right, Hieronimus, you're going to get it in the end, though. We're going to tell you, you're going to get it in the end." And I said before that, unfortunately, we taped our phone calls to Apple with their knowledge of it, and in this negotiation, and they said, "Look, Bob, I know the Beatles have stood in the way of your publishing this book on the Yellow Submarine. So what we promise is they won't. They'll get out of the way." I don't know if you're aware of this, but over 12 other people wanted to do a book on the Yellow Submarine. Every one of them were hammered so badly that they withdrew. Fortunately, fortunately, we got this kind of minimal go-ahead, because it's awfully difficult to get permissions from the Beatles to do anything, as you probably well know, especially about this film. So what we did was we went to the BBC for $50,000, broadcasted to America a 3-hour special to America on the Beatles Yellow Submarine with the crew that created it. No, of course not. John, Paul, George, Ringo weren't there. There were promises, but they weren't there. But then we invited Apple in. Apple went to the back studios of BBC while we were doing our BBC show, and there was about 50 or 60 of us there altogether. They would interview John Coates or Jack Stokes or Bob Balser, or you name them. They would be interviewed because they were all there. And everything was fine from that standpoint. It worked out well. We didn't have any run-ins. Unfortunately, after that particular program, and after the DVD came out, they took what you find on the DVD in the special interviews. That was taken from what we did in at the BBC.
Oh, I see.
But you will notice there is no credit whatsoever was ever given to us or BBC in that process. Of course, we paid BBC, so I guess why you and then credit anyway. But anyway, the point is that it's really very peculiar to have to go through life always looking behind. But I learned a hell of a lesson there. And of course, when it came for us to write the book, guess what? Apple said no. He said no. And I said, hey, wait a second. Don't you remember we had an agreement? And we have a tape of that agreement. And we have letters from you saying, go ahead, do it. Well, when the Beatles, Apple had about perhaps you talk about attorneys that are powerful. My God. And everyone said to us, Bob, we told you so. It's a dead deal. There's no way. You're not going to get to do this book now. No matter, you've got all these interviews, da-da-da-da-da. It's not, our story, again, is not going to be told, Bob. We told you. They didn't say this in a nasty way. But I'm younger than they are. I'm like a kid. I'm 68. They're in their 80s and 90s. And, they looked at me then as a kid, and I still am in a certain sense. But fortunately, we had two attorneys that basically knew how to play their game. And finally, they relented and allowed us to publish this book. Now, this book, Inside the Yellow Submarine, altogether, it did take over 40 years. It cost, in order to do something like this, there's no way to make a profit on this. There's no way. I mean, just throwing the event alone at $50,000 over there at the BBC certainly won't make even that. Let alone, and it was not done to make money. It was done. I'm an historian, and my other work, which is seen on the History Channel, Discovery Channel, National Geographic, Sci-Fi Channel, it's been seen on German television, Russian television. It's been published in Japan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was done out of trying to get to the bottom of what did this archetypal film mean, and why does it have such a life that will continue on almost forever, and has a lot to do with what you and I would talk about, love and peace. It was just that important. There's no way in the world to make any money on this, and that wasn't the purpose, and that's basically the reason why I got the cooperation of all the co-workers. When you work with them on that level, you bond as a group. You know, you really do. So you know why that was important? Because here they are, being 70, 80 years old, telling their children, I worked on the Yellow Submarine. And their children would say, Dad, I just looked at the credits, and your name's not there. Good Lord, there's no way that artist can explain that, and it hurt them. I mean, it didn't hurt Heinz Edelman, because, you know, he was just doing the job, and then he didn't even want to do the job. It's just that there was only one man that could do it on the planet, literally, and he was the man, and he sacrificed years of his life, no doubt about it. He worked around the clock. He was getting 2 to 4 hours sleep every 2 to 3 days. He was paid miserably, and he was not too happy with the process. And he did get to, fortunately, he did get to meet and talk with John Lennon, and he enjoyed that, because what did they talk about? They talked about the Doors. What I mean by the Doors is the use of acid and
Doors
the
of
work
Perception.
Correct. Doors of Perception. You hit it on the head.
So was this prior to the film or during the filming, or
during the filming, during the creation of the Yellow Submarine film? They got together and went out to a couple little places in London, and then they focused. That's the kind of thing they would talk about. It was amazing from that standpoint that Heinz Edelman would tolerate so much from individuals who really had no idea that you had a genius. You didn't have you had a master genius. There's a difference between a genius and a master genius. And without him, the film wouldn't have gotten done. The meaning of the film comes out subconsciously or unconsciously. And it's exactly what John Lennon has been pushing for a long time: love and peace. And that the way to resolve differences is not through killing one another, but through reason and trying to work things out, which unfortunately was not being done, and probably was going to be that way forever until we literally got into the picture to uncover this simple message. And it's really directly, and you know, most people think about love and they have their own picture of it, but let me give you a small insight into what secret societies have always said about love. It's going to surprise you. Being a member of a number of secret societies, I was always interested in what they thought was most important. They all point to love, and they all say this, that love is the cohesive force of the universe. It is the coming together of power of the universe. It's the unifying. So that phrase that all of us had on our mind back in the late 60s that people used to laugh at, we are one people on one planet. That, I believe, is the message of the Yellow Submarine. It wasn't a conscious thing done. The sleep deprivation probably had a lot to do with some of the more important meanings of things. Because, as I mentioned, Heinz Edelman got very little sleep. And in one night, when he was about ready, he wanted to quit. He quit several times doing the film. But one night, he wanted to quit so badly that he decided, hey, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this the way I want to do it. So what he did in that one night was create all the blue meanies. Now, there are lots of different types of blue meanies. You know, we're not just the guy with the Mickey Mouse ears and everything like that. You know, there were tall, thin ones, there were fat ones,
Yeah.
there were all kinds of blue meanies. And in one night, he devised them all. And when he devised them all, he enjoyed then that process. They basically realized that love is the answer, and that unification of the planet is the key. And if we could do this, we would end war. Now, as corny as that might sound, and as naive as that sounds, I believe that that is what eventually is going to happen.
Well, listen, before I sign off, I'm just reaching over just to have a double check here. I've got the record cover, the original Yellow Submarine record cover. If you, as you'll know, if you look at the cover on the top of the hill, you have John Lennon standing behind Paul McCartney, appearing to be displaying the Devil's Horn sign. Now, this has been picked up on, especially since in recent years, what with the internet taking off. What is your take on that? It's not the only time it happens. There's a couple of other bits, sort of instances where it happens in the movie and what have you. But what's your take on that?
Well, every symbol, every hand signal has multiple levels of meaning. Now, the meaning that has become very popular now is that that's the devil's horns. That's not the original meaning. It can be used to say the devil, but that's not the meaning that John Lennon had of it. This is a balance. I don't want to get into a strong palmistry here, but each finger represents a planet. The little finger is Mercury, and the pointing finger, that's Jupiter. It is the expansion of consciousness and related to love. Jupiter is expansion. Jupiter is that which, as you know, is our largest planet in this particular solar system, and it has to do with luck, has to do with religion, has to do with spirituality. Mercury has always been symbol for the mind. That is the reasoning capacity. And when you bring both of those two things together, you have what might be referred to, well, gigantic, mega love. And what would gigantic, mega love be? If love is the cohesive force of the universe, then that means we are at one. We are one people on the planet. That's what it means. You can find other meanings that have been made up over the last 30, 40 years, but anyone who knows anything about palmistry, and the Beatles, you know, these guys were well educated into esoterica, especially Sir Paul and John and George. There was a bookstore that they would go to that had all of this research material on it. Right. There was an art gallery and a bookstore. It was the International something or other. It slipped my mind right now. But, you know, we've talked to the former owner of it, and we know the kind of books the Beatles were getting. And Sir Paul basically said to the owner, he said, look, you know, whenever you see a book that deals with this kind of stuff, send it on my way. And he did. They did, and they were educated from that standpoint. That's the reason why I got very excited when you mentioned those possible murals inside the
Casbah Coffee Club. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That indicates, just like when Sir Paul McCartney did Standing Stone. Remember that?
Remember the orchestral piece.
You know,
wasn't it? Yeah.
He revealed a great deal there, and I've always been fond of that particular work. But there are many standing stones in the United Kingdom, and for good reason. United Kingdom, you know, this is sacred land. There are so many meanings in regards to the kind of things that are going on there. But it's sacred land. It's land upon which maybe, well, I won't say maybe, I do believe that Jesus' family found its way there, and for good reason, because we don't know much about his family. And it really changes things a great deal when you understand that there are multiple levels of meaning to every symbol. That's the rule. But in fundamentalism, when they want to beat something to death, when they want to kill the Beatles, when they want to put them down as much as they can, they say, hey, look at that Lennon. It's obvious to me. He's a Satanist. He's given us the sign of the horns. That's a lie. It's not true. It's the same thing that with all the BS that the Nixon administration was putting out about not just Lenin. I mean, they were holding Lenin away from this country because they knew that this was a powerful voice and a positive voice that Nixon would have to go up against, and their job was to get rid of this guy, one way or the other, which I believe they eventually succeeded in doing. I don't believe that the story that we got, that it was just one person involved. There's a good deal more involved there. But the key thing is that if you want to destroy the very fabric of a country, you do what the fundamentalists are doing, which is they will point to someone like Thomas Jefferson. To them, he is Satan. Why is Thomas Jefferson Satan to these fundamentalists? Because he believes in the separation of church and state. He believed and brought into law in Virginia first that we have to have separation of church and state so people could have freedom of religion, that any religion was possible. Fundamentalists today in the world are against it. They do not believe that they believe it's their way or the highway. And I deal with them all the time, mainly because of the murals that I've done, and some of them that they destroyed, my artwork. If you go to certain aspects on the internet, you'll find out that they'd like to say that I'm some type of a Satanist, talking about and I'm trying to take over part of the world. What the hell part of the world am I trying to take over? Who would listen to me anyway? You know?
What about in relation to some of the pop videos we get nowadays from, say, your Lady Gagas and your Rihannas and what have you? There's a lot of symbols there, hell of a lot of symbols. In fact, so many they're quite overwhelming. Do you think there's something going on there?
Yes, there is.
Something
They know that
dark, perhaps?
I think. It's very popular to do these things, and popularity is the key to everything when it comes to making big money. So, and they like to be respected. The reason why I know partly this is my wife and I were interviewed by Madonna's husband. Now, I can't recall his name anymore, but we were doing it on the Kabbalah, and we were talking about that. And he's no longer married to her anyway now. He was sharing with me and my wife some of their interpretations of the Kabbalah, which were very poor, very, very poor. And what I mean by that is inaccurate and superficial, on the surface, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know if Madonna is still involved in that. But what happens is when you have a person like Madonna, she has to be one of the most wealthy of the female vocalists in the world today. I don't know if she's worth $1 billion yet, but she's close to it. These individuals obviously catch on to certain things that I believe that they think are going to make them semi-deities, powerful people, to people that are their admirers. You know,
there's some interesting images actually from Madonna's latest tour.
Well, there's some terrible images. Look at Danzig. I mean, look at when you look at Metallica. You have some real dark sides to that, and then you have some lighter sides to it, such as the group called Metallica. But heavy metal music is not or punk music is not it's got some sharp edges to it. Let's put it that way.
But what do you think's happening here? Do you think they're trying to poison people's minds? Do you think there's an ulterior motive? What do you think's happening here? Do you have a set
I think they have
opinion on this?
I think they have genuine reason not to trust the governments, the military, the media, especially the media, and they want to show their defiance in some way, and this is one small way of being able to show that defiance, but it's not going to get them to where they really want to go, which is trying to unify people, because that's what we need. We don't need a third world war, or we don't need, what Japan is experiencing right now, And they're never going to be able to tell us the truth about just how bad it is over there, because I've heard it indicated that one of the biggest problems that they're having is water. They have eliminated their best water. Fuji has been poisoned, so I've heard. But all their other water that doesn't necessarily come from there is not good. Now, water may be and eventually more costly than oil, because you can't drink oil and live. You need water. He who controls water will control the world. So there's good reason for most musicians, rock musicians, to be very skeptical. It's just that if they pay attention and read on the internet, they're going to get led astray, because you're not reading unbiased works on the internet. You're reading a lot of work which can't be documented well and never has been documented well, but documentation to them doesn't mean anything. It's just accepted that way. So there are definitely some really dark things happening, and especially in music. At a certain time, in rap music, it was absolutely deplorable. It seems to have grown out of some of those experiences of, you know how rap music was talking about women, as if they were just nothing but a vagina. That's it.
There's also suggestions of COINTELPRO as well within the hip-hop community. Whether that's true or not, I'm not qualified to say.
It's hard to say if any of these things are true. You're right, and that's the reason why there are no quick answers to this. I would have to stop everything that I'm doing, which I'm not willing to do, and go back over all my old research to check certain things out. You know, the problem is I'm writing 4 books right now. I'm not doing interviews. When you're writing 4 books at a time, there is no time to just backtrack into other fields that you've already gone through. You have to put that off till I'm finished these pieces. And these 4 works are going to take not only years to do, but are going to cost me a small fortune to be able to do, because how do you pay yourself for writing your own work? It's a problem. You just can't sit and write, and then you have to have incomes from somewhere, and that interferes with the writing process. You need to spend a good deal of time alone, away from everybody and away from telephones. So that's the reason why this is an important interview to me today, because not only that, though, Matt, you've not only done your homework, but you've probed into other areas that are unique. You've given some possibilities that I would love to stop everything I'm doing now and check out.
So would I.
But there's no time. I would love to. First thing to do is, are there photographs of that particular nightclub? God, I keep forgetting the name of it. Alhambra.
The Casbah.
Thank you, the Casbah. That there's someone's got to have photographs of them.
Yeah, sure.
And that would clinch it, because anything on the internet is suspect until you've got definite pointings to where the information comes from. And unfortunately, there are very few people that footnote or document where they're getting their information from, and that should
damn annoying at times.
It happens all the time.
Well, here we are, June 2012. The Yellow Submarine DVD and the Blu-ray are out. There's also the re-release of the song track CD. This is probably the 3rd or 4th re-release since its original outing in '68. It's been out on video before and then on other formats and what have you. Where can Yellow Submarine possibly go next? What new medium? What new concept?
Well, that's a great question, and I got an answer.
Thank you.
And I'm trying to figure out how much I can say without betraying someone's trust. There has always been the idea from Sir George Martin of having some kind of stage production of the Yellow Submarine. And in my I always, when I contact him, I bridge that issue, and he still believes that something is going to come out of that. There is something new that is going to happen. It's certainly not, it's moving in that direction, but it's certainly not been thoroughly approved. Sir George has, when he did the piece of Love, I understand that supposedly will never be on a DVD. It would never be on its actual production. You won't be able to see it. After 10 years, supposedly, it will not be performed anymore. And that's very painful. And I think he's not, I don't think he's happy with that. And I wish that would change, but I don't think it's going to happen. But I do believe something is going to come eventually out of Sir George Martin if he gets the permissions. And if, my gosh, just hope that his health stays good so that he can finish a project like that, because whatever it will be, it's going to be very strenuous and it's going to take years to do. So something else is going to come out of it from what that we don't know about it. But if not, the younger people right now, when I'm talking 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years old, are being introduced to the Beatles in such a way that the Beatles be in their heart forever, because it's that kind of song that Sir Paul did, the kind of creation that the film is. I'm with children frequently, and it's just, as soon as they see it, they're hooked, and it's a very positive hook, because they learn something that you don't have to kill to win. You can overcome opposition through love and through music, and that's, I think, the real future of our planet. We're maybe looking 1,000 years down the line, to put it that way. I always thought I was going to live to see it, but I doubt it now. But in the hundreds of years ahead, we are one people. We will become one people. We won't necessarily have one government, thank God for that, and that will end war as we know it. Notice I said as we know it. There are other wars that you can have that people don't know about.
Bob, thank you very much for speaking to me.
It's
been a pleasure. It's been an honour. And, of course, if anyone else wants to hear your pearls of wisdom, they can tune into your radio show. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Every Sunday night for past 25 years, we're in our quarter of a century now, on Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on WCBM.com, you can listen to the show. The whole planet can listen to the show. It's not broadcasting on a lot of stations, but it's picked up by the internet as we do it.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to some of the future shows. We do have a special love for UFOs, and we have a special love for the divine feminine and feminine consciousness. That's really the key as to where we are now. We want more women in government. We want more women in corporate structures. And when we do that, we will be more in balance, and you will find that women are not so easy to go to war as men. And that will be one of the Dalai Lama said in 2005, that it will be the women in the Western world that will bring great change to the world and bring peace to the world. Unfortunately, us men are still too hung up on our testosterone and pointing fingers to grow up. But there are some of us that have, and the more men that become involved in that aspect of it, the easier it's going to be for our planet to move into that. Women are not taking over. They just want to be half. That's not much to ask. And if we get to that point, big changes will come much faster.
Bob, thank you very much for talking to me.
You're very welcome, Matt.
So there you have it. Don't forget, you can check into Hieronimus at his website, 21stcenturyradio.com, and don't forget our website here. It's conspiromedia.wordpress.com. Thanks a lot for listening. hopefully see you again soon. Bye bye.